Hi there, and welcome to Where's the Money Gone, the football podcast that takes you inside the boardroom with me, Adrian Goldberg. I'm a West Bromwich Albion season ticket holder, pray for me, and an investigative journalist. And as usual, joined by Charlie Methven. Charlie, former director of both Sunderland and Charlton. He's been an advisor to both Arsenal and Spurs, a boyhood Oxford United fan. And Charlie, you'll be celebrating because Oxford look like they've survived for another season in the Championship, which is no mean feat for Oxford, to be fair.
No, that's absolutely right, Adrian. A cracking 2-0 win yesterday over my one of my previous clubs, Sunderland. I think it's fair to say that Sunderland are seeing out the regular season and preparing for the playoffs, so it's probably the right time for Oxford to be playing against them. A little smirk, I have to say, after the years I lived in Sunderland, being told that my hometown club was a tin pot outfit and would never amount to anything. So whenever they do get one over on Sunderland, it does always make me smirk a little bit. But no, it is an achievement for Oxford. I mean, if you leave aside the 3 seasons that they spent in the top division in the 1980s, I think it's 12 seasons in their history that they've managed to be in and survive in the second tier. So that's in 130 years, albeit we only turned professional in 1960. But nonetheless, that still tells you it's one of the best seasons in Oxford's history. And given all that's gone in the last 25, 30 years since Robert Maxwell's death, it's for those of us who were there, and I was obviously heavily involved with the club during the period when we really fell into the conference and had to fight our way all the way back. It is a wonderful and emotional thing to see the club back. I wouldn't say necessarily where it belongs, but at the upper end of where it belongs is a wonderful thing. So yeah, terrific day yesterday. And tempered slightly by seeing Charlton's automatic promotion hopes and being beaten at Wrexham. And obviously congratulations to Wrexham on their remarkable rise as well. And perhaps that'll be a story for another day. But Charlton will now, like Sunderland, be preparing for the playoffs. So all of my sort of 3 clubs, Sunderland, Charlton, and Oxford, have either had a great end to the season or are, preparing for a playoff campaign. And as you said implied earlier on, Adrian, not such happy news for the Baggies.
No, indeed. We move swiftly on. I think I worked out that Albion had you taken away the first 6 games of the season, after which we were top, Albion would average something like 1.15 points per game, which would be enough to finish 15th or 16th in the Championship. Such is the level to which we have fallen. And I know that represents success for Oxford. That's probably our worst position for about a quarter of a century at the Hawthorn. So yeah, let's not dwell on that. Look, this time I want to talk about whether elite Premier League clubs are killing off intergenerational support by cutting off the supply of season tickets. And later on, we'll talk about whether you're one of those supporters who uses a dodgy stick to stream live football. If you do, should you feel guilty about it? Police say the number of supporters watching illegal streams has gone through the roof. First, though, Charlie, let's talk about Manchester City and these other elite clubs who've been accused of strangling intergenerational support. City supporters recently staged a peaceful protest before their game against Villa, calling for more season tickets at the Etihad and cheaper prices all round. City are raising their capacity to 60,000 by extending the North Stand. That's an extra 8,000 seats, but supporters say they haven't expanded the number of season tickets for 6 seasons. And I heard similar complaints a few months ago when I interviewed Joe Blott for my forthcoming book, Where's the Money Gone? Joe is from Spirit of Shankly, a supporters group at Liverpool. He goes with his son, but told me it was increasingly difficult for supporters of his generation to pass on the flame because it was impossible to get a season ticket for his grandson. And Man City fans were also complaining about match day prices for a family of 4 to attend the game against Villa. 2 adults, 2 children. It would have cost £226. So, intergenerational support. You and I know how important that is, Charlie. I mean, I came to football through a family that had no real interest in football. My dad, all credit to him, would take me to the game. I've got no criticism of my dad in that regard, but he didn't have football in his blood, as it were. So I kind of came to the Albion through my own devices. But I think it's fair to say many football supporters do come to the game through mom, dad, uncle, aunt, granddad, grandma, whatever.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the start of many of our journeys. At the start of my journey with my grandfather, my father actually not only was football not in his blood, but he really wouldn't be seen anywhere near a football ground. Of course, football stadiums in those days, we're talking about the early 1980s, were very different places, weren't they, Adrian?
Yeah.
And did require perhaps a level of further commitment than they would do these days from a parent who wasn't that into it. So I went with my grandfather and with his group of farming friends to Oxford United in the early 80s. And without that, probably would never have been bitten by the bug, I'm guessing. So intergenerational support is important. But I think at the same time, I would caution against any kind of sepia tinted view on this. This is a subject that merits detailed analysis as opposed to sort of rather flippant, sort of cheap shot, rose tinted spectacles, that type of thing. Because let's unwrap the numbers as they pertain to Manchester City itself. Because I think the implication in these types of things is that good old fashioned proper fans are being priced out and new plastic fans are being welcomed in. That's normally the sort of, the gist of the underlying argument with these things. So let's go back to when Man City were at Main Road, right? So at the dawn of the Premier League, they were there in the Premier League, first season in the Premier League. Main Road at the time had a capacity of about 36,000, and Man City's average crowd was 24,698, right? So home attendance in terms of strip out the away fans was 22,500, and the number of season ticket holders was 15,000. So at the start of the Premier League, you have 15,000 Man City season ticket holders. How many season ticket holders do you have today? Do you have the information to hand?
I don't know how many they've got now.
37,000. Right. So the number of season ticket holders at Manchester City during the period of the Premier League era has increased from 15,000 to 37,000, right? Now, it's very hard to make the argument that historic Man City supporting families are being deprived of season tickets that they might once have had when you actually look at those numbers. Now, let's think about the pricing of those season tickets, right? So Man City's season tickets go, and they've just announced they've frozen the prices for next season. Man City's season tickets go from £540 at the cheapest end, and this is for there's non-concessions, full season tickets. £540 per season at the cheapest end to £1,080 at the most expensive age. So that's between £28.50 per match and £56 per match, right? Now, I think it'd be very hard to argue that those are bad value. You're watching some of the greatest players in the world for 2 to 3 hours of entertainment for 25, 30 quid.
No, but the difficulty is getting hold of one, isn't it? They're expanding the stadium by 8,000. And if you're one of those 37,000 and you want to bring your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter, and pass on the flame as it was passed on to you by another family member, perhaps, because City aren't allowing any more season tickets and haven't allowed any for 6 seasons, that's where it becomes impossible to pass on the flame.
So then let's get on to, they've got 140,000 members. So those are people who pay a small annual subscription in order to have the right to buy match-to-match tickets. And they've got a season ticket waiting list of 120,000. Right. So you've got effectively, if you think about the new attendance being 60,000, and of that 60,000, 5,000 being away fans, roundabout, that type of thing. So you've got 55,000 spaces for home fans, and you've got 37,000 season ticket holders. So you've got 18,000 seats, and you've got 140,000 members, and you've got a waiting list for season tickets of 120,000. So effectively, it's already quite difficult for the 140,000 members to get tickets to matches, right? And I'm not quite sure how Man City do it, but I know at Arsenal there's a ballot, right? So you have to put your name in for the ballot and hope that it comes out. So let's just say that you're a member and you've got 15,000 odd seats to shoot out, and you've got another 140,000 members alongside you, and you're entering the ballot and you're hoping to get a ticket. Now, you might get a few tickets a season at the moment. If Man City decided to increase the number of season ticket holders from 37,000 to, let's say, 45,000, and reduce the number of available seats by another 8,000, so you were down to a tiny number of available home match-by-match seats, then where would the people on the membership list go? So that the 140,000 members and the 120,000 waiting list would go down to 113,000 on the waiting list and 130 odd thousand members. But they would then have a vanishingly small number of seats available for them to even be able to attend on a match-to-match basis. So the question here is who are we actually looking after? We've already established effectively that a huge chunk of those Man City season ticket holders are themselves fair weather fans. Because when we go back to the start of the Premier League era, there are only 15,000 of them, and now there are 37,000 of them.
I think that's I'm not accepting that, Charlie. That's a bit harsh. I mean, the fact that whatever we're talking about now, 33 years ago, they weren't season ticket holders. Some of them may not even have been alive 33 years ago. So you can't call them fair weather fans. And football as a whole in 19... Well, no. Hold on a second. I'm going to come back at you on this. Football as a whole was still recovering from the horrors of the 1980s, and we don't need to rehearse those here. But in 1992, football was only 3 years past, or 4 years past, I think, the nadir of football attendance in modern times in this country. So I'm not sure that I agree.
I agree. I'm simply saying that
fair
these
weather's
people
too much. Come on.
Well, I mean, okay, fair weather compared to me and you, right, and our ilk, because I think there is a conflation that goes on here where people talk about real football fans, and by real football fans, we do, I think, mean people who would have been there in the late 1980s and who cared enough about the game and were passionate enough about the game that despite the poor facilities, despite the occasional threat to violence, would still go because we're so passionate about it. So we are the ones who are the lifeblood, right? So we are the ones who are there through thick and thin, and there were people when Man City went down to what's now called League One at some point, which is in the mid to late 90s, and the crowds back in those days, I'm just having a look down there, they had risen a bit. They were about 26,000, that type of thing. In those days, still nowhere near capacity, and we're talking about this is 25 years ago. So all I'm saying is that there are a substantial number of people who do have season tickets now, who their families, they themselves, their families were not there 15, 20 years ago. So the success of football, the expansion of stadiums to a much higher capacity, has enabled a very significant number of people who were not historically there now to be there. Now, I guess the question is actually, so in other words, what I'm saying is I don't buy into the whole, good old salt of the earth football fans are being hard done by here. They're being done down. More of them are being able to attend now than were then, and in much better facilities now than then, and still actually at a reasonable price if they are season ticket holders. So what we're actually really talking about, which is a more technical question, which I do think does merit some thought, is this point about, looking after the future generations of supporters. In other words, so if you are a supporter and if you cannot get your grandchild to come to the stadium because you cannot find a seat for the grandchild, then there is a structural problem in terms of the future support of that club. That's obvious. That's a demography and a commercial point, right? So in other words, clubs do have to give some thought to, okay, even if we aren't allowing new adult season ticket holders, we do need to be thinking about nurturing the next generation of people who will take over, either from some of the current season ticket holders who don't necessarily have the generational support to hand on, but also from, just natural wastage and all this type of stuff, because you never know when dark days come, then you need to make sure you've got your base looked after. So do I think that there's an important discussion to be had here about how very big clubs think about how to use their stadiums to make sure that the next generation, the generation after that, do get bitten by the bug? Absolutely, yes. Do I think per se that there should definitely be more adult season ticket holders in stadiums which are effectively running at limited supply compared to demand? No, I don't think that's the case. Either in interests of fairness, because there are such a large number of people who do want the opportunity to come at least sometimes during the season, or commercially, because and this is the second bit of pushback I'm going to have on this, and well, then hand over to you, Adrian. In football, I am a great opponent of cakeism. And if you remember, cakeism is the political philosophy enjoined by that great man, Boris Johnson, who said, I'm a great fan both of having cake and eating it, right? Now, this is the case with Premier League, top-end Premier League fan bases. They want to have the greatest manager in the world. They want to have the greatest players in the world. They want to have the greatest facilities in the world. They want to have everything. And they don't want to pay for it.
Okay,
right?
well,
That they do not want to pay for it.
I'm going to come back to you on two things. I'm just going to repeat my criticism really of your premise that whether 1992 is a fair starting point, because that was 33 years ago. So you may have been
okay. Well, call it 2000. Call it because I came all the way back to 2000.
I suppose my point is that you may have been a Man City season ticket holder. You may be 30 and not even around at that time, but still regard yourself as a dyed-in-the-wool fan, and who may have become a season ticket holder, having at some level having had City in the blood through a parent, an uncle, a grandparent, an aunt, and consider yourself a dyed-in-the-wool City fan through family heritage, even if those people didn't necessarily go and have season tickets. And of course, in those days, it was much easier to turn up on the day anyway and pay on the gate. Also, when City's ground is 60,000 capacity, I bet there won't be 5,000 seats for away fans. There'll probably be more like 3,000. But I agree there's a balance to be struck between season ticket holders and supporters who, for various, no doubt legitimate reasons, can only go occasionally. They may have work reasons, financial commitments elsewhere, and I think there has to be scope in the stadium, both for those supporters and for supporters who are travelling from afar. And in fairness to Joe Blott, when I spoke to him about this at Spirit of Shankly, he said, we're not trying to block fans who might come from Africa or Saudi Arabia or other European countries. It's just about getting that balance right. Now, in terms of getting that balance right, if you are one of those occasional Manchester City supporters, the City fans who put out the leaflet and held the protest before the Villa game were saying, look, if a family of four just want to come to this one-off game, as we acknowledge that some fans will, family of four, £226. I mean, that's rock concert prices, but nobody expects.
Absolutely fine. Do you know what, Adrian? Absolutely fine. If your concern as a fan group is that you believe that ticket prices should be lower, fine. Sack Pep, get a cheaper manager, and crack on with it. I've got so much time for fans who are genuine and coherent about these types of things. And we'll come back on to Joe Blott in a moment, because he is, right? But unfortunately, these supporters groups shoot themselves in the foot, because they're very often the same people who complain when things aren't as good as they might be on the first team pitch, right? Now, for those types of fans, like, FC United of Manchester, who took a principled stand, we don't like what our football club has become. We are going to form another club because that is where our passion lies, to be a local community football club, and we want to do that. The fans of Exeter City, we're going to buy our club and we're going to run our club. And even when other people come along and say we want to buy the club, we're going to say no, because we believe that Exeter City is more valuable to us as it is than it would be in that situation. Motherwell, exactly the same in Scotland. Big Scottish club, fully owned by its fans, who have turned down takeover attempts in the last few years because they believe in things like cheap ticket prices, in things like full fan engagement and all that type of stuff. Huge respect for those types of organisations, those types of clubs, etc. Zero respect for these fan groups who want to have Pep, want to have Haaland, want to have all these types of things, that then say, oh, no, but the supporters shouldn't pay. No. If these guys were being honest, and if they said, look, We think that match by match tickets are too high, and therefore we, as season ticket holders, are willing to pay more on our season tickets. Because, as I said earlier on, they're paying 25 quid a ticket on the season tickets. Sorry, 25 quid a match on the season tickets, the cheapest season tickets at Man City, which is less than a lot of championship clubs to watch some of the greatest football in the entire world. But no, they don't. They say we want cheap season tickets, we want cheap match tickets, we want supporters in the stadium who won't buy merchandise. We basically want our club to fail as a business. That's what we want. We want failure. We want proper failure as a business, and we want those rich people in Abu Dhabi to stump up and cover those losses because that's their duty, and the rest of us are just here to enjoy ourselves. And
Okay,
there's
well, I'm going
no
to again
coherence to it.
two points of. Go on, go on. Go on. I was going to say two things. One is pushback, and one is a kind of a little nuance.
Just coming back. So Joe Block talks about Liverpool, and I think there is a strong argument that at Liverpool they've got the balance wrong, right? So bear in mind that we've just said there are 37,000 season tickets holders in a stadium which is currently 54,000 capacity, the Etihad, but at Liverpool the number's 28,000. And that is in a club with, I would argue, a much higher historic legacy support than Man City. So absolutely at Liverpool, if they aren't giving season tickets out to the kind of levels at least that Man City are at, not even Man United are more like 45,000. But, if they're stuck down at 28,000, then there are definitely going to be legacy Liverpool supporting families who are going to be blocked out of generational support there, absolutely 100%. So that balance seems to be wrong. The United 45,000 is high. That is very, very high. 37,000 from 54,000 capacity at Man City, proportionately, that's high. That is proportionately high by any stadium. But anyway, sorry, back on to you, Adrian.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me get a word in edgeways, Charlie. I'm very grateful. I was just going to throw a little a nuance in here that City have taken measures to restrict people buying season tickets who then don't go to the game. And they've also done that at West Brom, by the way. Talking of future generations, my club, to their enormous credit, charges £23 for an under-11s season ticket, which I heartily endorse. And I would happily pay more for my adult season ticket to encourage that to continue. But what City have done, and in fact what West Brom have done as well, have warned supporters that if you don't attend a certain number of games as a season ticket holder, then your season ticket will be rescinded. And I actually agree with that, because I think there is what, of course, not everybody can get to every game. And I think, again, you've got to have a sensible number at which you apply this. But clearly, people buy season tickets in order to buy the tickets for the big match, but then are happy to give other matches a miss. And you can see that, you see the evidence of that at City, where very often, even in fact for quite big matches, you do see a lot of blue plastic on display around the stadium. Supporters will counter that that's partly a result of shifting kickoff times, that games are played on Sunday evenings, they're played on Monday nights, they're played at non-traditional times. I would say that after all these years, even if that is still sometimes unreasonable in my view, and sometimes some of the fixture rescheduling isn't great from a fan point of view, I'd say by now that's going to happen. So it's not really an excuse to not attend a certain number of games. So I kind of understand why City are doing that, because they don't want people taking up space in the stadium with an empty seat by failing to use a season ticket. And they do have a ticket exchange system, so that if you can't go to a game, you can sell it back via the club's own secondary market. Talking of secondary markets, by the way, another bone of contention with City fans is that they use the secondary selling site via GoGo. And City say that this has led on some occasions, that the use of a secondary ticketing site has led on some occasions to away supporters being housed amongst City fans, and that's caused violence. And I must say, I don't quite understand why the club's own ticket exchange isn't sufficient for that. Why would you partner with a secondary ticketing site, which risks away supporters getting into your home section?
I don't know. is the answer to that, because
Mm.
they've got their membership database. So really, there should be no reason to go outside of their own membership database and their own platform to do that. The cynics amongst the City support base might feel that perhaps this is a way of extracting higher prices from a broader market. In other words, the pressure on supply might be higher on a genuine third-party website than on an internal one where there are obviously a smaller number of people available. But the answer is I don't really know what lies behind that. There shouldn't be any reason to need to do that. There's just another thing just to throw into the mix here, which is just worth noting, and I don't sort of say this for good or for ill, but it's a fact that fans who attend occasionally spend much more in the stadium than those who are season ticket holders. I think obviously parts of this are just common sense, which is to say that if you're only coming twice a year, you're more likely to make that occasional visit the moment of your visit to the club shop. Whereas if you're a season ticket holder, you'll spread your visits to the club shop out over the course of the season. And that therefore, if you have one seat, which is a season ticket, and it's next to a seat, which is a non-season ticket, if that non-season ticket seat is used over the course of the 38 games by, let's say, 18 different people, each of them attending 2 matches, then you are going to get 18 visits to the club shop. Whereas the season ticket holder in the seat next door might make 1 or 2 visits to the club shop during the course of the season. So, that's just one example, but it tends to also play out in relation to food and beverage as well, which is the occasional visitor to the stadium will normally make a point of getting there an hour to 2 hours before the match, feeling the pre-match build-up, going to the bars and having food in the stadium, etc. Whereas a season ticket holder might often have their own more established non-stadium pre-match routine, going to a local pub where they'll meet a bunch of friends, knowing exactly what time they need to get a bus or walk to the stadium, so they arrive there just before the start of the game. I don't know if you're one of these, Adrian, but that is generally sort of quite a common way of season ticket holders organising themselves. And over the course of the season, that does play out in quite significant differential in income. Because again, if I just want to go back to this season ticket holder who's paying £28.50 per match at Man City, right? So that is first of all a cheap ticket, right? Very, very cheap ticket, which even if you were being quite fair and selling it through the club's own platform, you might well be looking to retail that ticket for at least double that, right? So £56 rather than £28. But secondly, that season ticket holder who's paying £28.50 per match will probably spend something like £3 to £4 in the stadium on average. And it doesn't mean that each of them spend £3 to £4. It means that some people spend nothing and others spend 8, right? So it's an average out over the whole thing. But the person who's coming and paying £56 for that ticket is more likely on average to spend around about £12 to £14 around the stadium, etc. So your revenue is not just the extra 25 quid on the ticket, it's also an extra 10 quid on extra mural spend, right? So it does make a very significant difference when you add it up over the course of the whole season.
Let's talk about illegal streaming, Charlie, because this is massive in football. And of course, I wouldn't do such a thing and you wouldn't do such a thing. But I think anybody who is switched on enough about football to be listening to this podcast will know at least one person and probably several people in their peer group who watches football through a dodgy stick or some other kind of illegal stream. And there was an interesting article this week in the Financial Times, and I'm just going to quote it here. The number of people who stream sports or other channels illegally in the UK has gone, quotes, through the roof, straining already stretched police forces in their efforts to prosecute consumers who flout the law. That's according to the head of Britain's Intellectual Property Crime Unit, Emma Warby. She's a detective chief inspector, head of the police Intellectual Property Crime Unit at the City of London Police. It goes on everywhere, Charlie. At one point, pubs were showing matches illegally, and some still do. That has been clamped down on, though, now by various local trading standards officers and by the police. But I'd say on a weekly basis, I get approached by people who say to me, "Do you want a dodgy stick?" It's everywhere.
Yeah, it is. And it is going through the roof. I've got a bit of history with this issue. When I first went to Sunderland in 2018 to run the club, fairly early on in our tenure, it became apparent that there were many pubs in the city that were showing home matches through illegal streaming. Right now, the whole methods of doing so were not as sophisticated as they are now. Things have moved on a lot in the last 7 years. But I gave a radio interview, I think it was, and I described these people as parasites, because that is literally what they are, right? So you've got a business, which is a pub, and it's trying to make money out of a product that we, the club, are paying to put on and charging people to come to. They are then paying us nothing for that product, either through paying Sky or through paying for our streaming service, whatever it might be. And they in turn are then making money out of their free, illegal, criminal free use. Oh, a huge firestorm blew up. I mean, it was, Charlie Methven calls fans parasites, etc.
A firestorm, not
And
a
I said, no,
fire
no.
stick, Charlie.
Yes, exactly. A firestorm over a fire stick. So my problem is, no, look, which the nuance of this got lost, as is often the case up there. And I said, no, it's the real fans who are the sufferers in this, right? Because they are the ones who are paying. They're the ones who are paying for season tickets. They're the ones who are paying for Sky subscriptions. And what they want is to see that money translated through into spend on the pitch, right? Now, if you've got the club leaking and the league and all the other various entities leaking money to illegal streamers out the side, that is less money coming into the sport, less money coming into the club, and therefore the fans are going to see a less good product on the pitch, less competitive product on the pitch. So it's the fans ultimately that are the big sufferers in this situation, the real fans, the ones who do pay. Now, things have moved on a lot since then, and as you say, it's become a really hot topic. And I think the concern is within the industry, Adrian, that bundled TV rights packages, by which we mean Sky TV paying the Premier League, let's say, or the Football League, a large chunk of money annually for the rights to broadcast those games exclusively, and then parcel those things up with some other sports and sell them to subscribers, right? So that's the whole business model.
That's the model, yeah.
How can that survive? How can Sky and other premium package sellers keep on paying those types of sums when large chunks of their target audience are accessing that content for free? Right. So this is a real big problem, and it's a tech problem as much as anything else, which is, how fast can you move to keep ahead of the people who are doing it illegally, in terms of things like geo blockers and all these different types, in terms of the police having the requisite information to be able to pursue, But as I said, whereas 7 or 8 years ago, it was some pubs who, and then those pubs then getting punters to come in and pay a bit of entrance money to come into the pub to watch it. We're now looking at millions of people with their own individual fire sticks. So in reality, when you've got a police force that doesn't even have the capability of pursuing some quite serious thefts like car theft, how much resource realistically is the police going to devote to charging around the country trying to find individual people who are using an illegal fire stick? I'd say that's a bit sort of far-fetched, frankly.
Yes. So your concern is that ultimately your concern is ultimately that it could destabilize the funding model of English football, in that if the Skies, if the DAZNs, the TNTs of this world decide that actually they're leeching far too much money away to these illegal streams, that they will stop buying up big football rights packages. Do we really see that happen, though, Charlie? They're still making a lot of money out of the subscriptions, aren't they?
Well, no. That's the problem, right? So the Football League annual conference, which I attended shortly before resigning from Charlton Athletic, the US broadcasters of English TV, English football, addressed the conference and raised it as their first point, the biggest single issue facing all of us is illegal streaming, right? Now, this is a major, major issue. Now, going back onto what you've just said there, which I think is a little bubble that needs to be pricked here, which is the assumption that the paying of vast amounts of money for bundled TV rights and selling them to subscribers is an ever increasing market, which is going really well. Now, I totally get why an English football fan would think that, because we ourselves currently are somewhat isolated from what's happening elsewhere. But what's happening elsewhere is that the cannibalization of that market and the fact that a lot of young people actually aren't paying these subscriptions, or most young people aren't paying these subscriptions anyway, because they just use YouTube for all of their consumption, whatever it might be, is meaning that there's very significant downward pressures on this market already. And you can see this in French football, where they've really struggled to get their TV rights away at all. Now, they ended up doing a deal with DAZN, and I think we might want to revisit this in a bit more detail. But the bottom line is that DAZN didn't pay that much for the rights. And then you've looked at the number of subscriptions that they've sold off the back of the rights since, and it becomes clear that despite not having paid all that much for the rights, they paid twice as much as they should have done, looking at the numbers. So that's a story for another day. The fact that the bundled TV rights package is on its way out gradually, right? And we'll come back onto the numbers behind that. You know, by gradually, we're talking about 5-10 years, not 5 months, 10 months. But this piracy is going to accelerate that. It's going to accelerate that process and could potentially bring it forward quite quickly, unless we're very, very careful about it, even if we are able to be very, very careful about it. So this is a big issue. This is a really, really big issue. And there's a reason why it's hit the Financial Times rather than the sports pages. It's because this is causing real pain at the higher levels of the broadcast world. And that pain will be visited down when it comes to the next negotiation of TV rights packages.
We'll talk about that in more detail on another week, Charlie, for sure. Absolutely. Thank you for your insight, as always. Thank you. Before we go, by the way, just to say, last week we asked how long did Brian Clough survive as manager of Leeds United? The answer was 44 days. Joe Byatt got the correct answer of that, just for fun. And if you do want to send any feedback and a response, maybe one or two Man City fans will want to push back on what Charlie has said on this week's episode, just send an email to goldbergradio@gmail.com. That's goldbergradio@gmail.com. Thank you to Jed Thomas for assisting with the production of this episode, and to Mark Machado at 1129 Media, as always, for his assistance with the YouTube and socials for this podcast. And just to say as well, if you do enjoy it, then do tell a friend. Nothing beats a personal recommendation. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Likewise, if you're streaming on Apple or podcast, our streams legitimately cost nothing, then do hit subscribe on Apple or Spotify as well. Thank you, Charlie. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.